you have to take charge of your own health. And it's not really my responsibility or anybody's responsibility to fix you. I'm just a guide. I'm there to kind of point out these things that you need to then kind of learn about and then take home what I give you to work on yourself. Because I don't want people coming back to see me, once a week for the rest of their life, because that means that I didn't do my job.
Welcome to Harmonic Alignment,
a podcast that explores the new frontier of energy medicine,
bridging the gap between Western medicine and quantum physics,
giving you easy and practical solutions.
Guided by
me, Dr. Larissa Sharipova,
and me, Priscilla Koblenz. Join us on a journey discovering your harmonic alignment. What if pain, joint replacement, digestive issues, anxiety, and thyroid conditions could be helped and even reversed with proper physical alignment? Today, we talk with a true innovator, Dan Vidal from Paragon Pain Solutions. You don't want to miss this conversation. Dan shines the light on how the physical alignment can help or hurt your overall health, sharing valuable insights on how you can take charge of your own health. I am so excited. I am here today with Dan Vidal from Paragon Pain Solutions. Dan and I met at Functional Medicine Forum, which is a group of alternative practitioners that Dr. Larissa Sharipova, Dr. L, as I refer to her, my co-host of this Harmonic Alignment podcast, created a monthly forum where practitioners of all different areas come and share their healing medicine. And Dan was sharing his healing medicine in December, and it was just this incredible experience to hear what's going on in the body and how it's causing pain, because I myself at the time was in a tremendous amount of knee pain, and I had been since August, and I had looked at everything from Egoscue to supplements, is it arthritis, and couldn't figure out really what was the root cause. And Dan changed it all for me. And so I'm so excited, Dan, that you're here today to share how movement and dysfunctional movement can really affect someone's health. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So tell us, how did you get started in your journey? What makes you wanted to go into this form of healing?
Like a lot of practitioners that get into this kind of work, I was dealing with my own issues. So I was diagnosed with scoliosis when I was 15. And it wasn't painful at that point, but I remember going to the doctor and they took out the little measurement tool and they had me bend over and looked at my spine. And the doctor said, okay, well, you got scoliosis and it's X number of degrees. It's not a problem now, but if it gets past whatever number of degrees, then we might have to consider surgery and sticking a rod in your back, basically. So thankfully, it never got that bad. It never got to that point. And I didn't have any pain for a long time. And then when I was in my mid-20s, I was working at a desk job. It was a job that I hated, and it was stressful, and I had to drive an hour each way to get there and to get home. And I was also at the time really into powerlifting because I was trying to build muscle. I've always been kind of thin, so I thought I need to build muscle to be a good way to get in shape. All the studies show that building muscle is great for longevity, and so I was really into powerlifting. And just this combination of all these things, being sedentary and sitting for those long periods in the car and at work, and then doing this heavy linear lifting, so deadlifts and squats and and bench press and all that kind of stuff, really put me in a position where I started to be in chronic pain all the time, pretty much.
Where were you experiencing pain?
Mostly back and neck pain, and I didn't really know what to do about it. So I did what most people do. I went to the chiropractor. I tried massage. And I really quickly got disillusioned with that stuff because, especially with the chiropractor, I remember going there and he took an x-ray and he told me what I already knew, which is that I had scoliosis. And so I was expecting him to then kind of tailor a treatment plan specifically for me and go these muscles are really tight, so you need to stretch these and you need to do these exercises to kind of get everything back into alignment. But he didn't do that. He just said, I'm going to crack your back and put you on the muscle stim machine. And why don't you just come back twice a week and we'll bill your insurance and then we'll just see how it goes. And here's a list of exercises that I give to everybody.
That didn't sit well with you. You're like,
no.
How does that work for me?
Right. It was just way too cookie cutter, and I knew I wasn't going to get any long-term relief like that. I didn't even really get any short-term relief, to be honest. Maybe I felt a little better for 20 or 30 minutes after the treatment, and then the pain came right back, especially after working all day and going and lifting. Now, as far as the lifting, I was really studying technique. I read Starting Strength, which is like the Bible and as far as like powerlifting goes, talking about proper form and everything. I was doing these kind of online meetups where we compare notes online, and then we'd meet up in person and lift with each other and kind of critique each other's technique. So I was doing everything I could to lift correctly and safely. I was trying to progress as fast as I could, but at the same time, I was also trying to be wary of overdoing it, and I'd take breaks if I felt like I had to. I was doing a lot of foam rolling too, because that was kind of in vogue at the time.
Because you thought that would help release the muscles or help
with
the tension in the muscles?
Yeah, speed up recovery, and just I knew that there was some kind of muscle imbalances, that some muscles were probably overly tight, some were probably underworking. I would just kind of use the foam roller and the massage balls, and I would just kind of roll on what I felt tight. But I didn't really know what I was doing. And there was really nobody online that was really guiding it in any kind of systematic way. Most of the videos you find on YouTube where it's like, this is how you foam roll your spinal erectors. This is how you foam roll your hips or your quads. So I was just kind of doing everything, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And again, temporary relief, but the pain would just keep coming back. So I kind of felt lost. I was just kind of searching around online and just looking for answers. There was a guy that I used to really follow very closely. His name is Elliot Hulse. He's based in the Tampa Bay area. At the time, he was really into kind of functional lifting and like holistic wellness stuff. He kind of introduced me to this idea of muscular imbalances, posture being a clue as to where those muscular imbalances were. So he did an interview with a guy by the name of Randy Clark, who I found out in the interview has a school down in Florida. And Elliot even said at the beginning of the interview, he said, a lot of the stuff that, I show you guys when I'm looking at posture and assessing people, I got this from Randy and his school. And so he had this interview with him, and then Randy was just talking about his philosophy at the school and what they teach. It just fascinated me because just hearing him talk, it just instantly clicked. And I was like, yeah, that's it. That's what I've been looking for. He talked about not only how they analyze posture at the school and they kind of use that to apply massage in a very systematic way and to kind of bring balance to the myofascial system, but he also talked about how posture and alignment can affect all these other things. Like one of the things he said that fascinated me was if your posture is off and you have restrictions in the abdominal area and in the muscles that surround the abdomen or tension in the organs themselves, like in the intestines, then you're probably not absorbing food very well. And if you're not absorbing food very well, you could be eating the best food, but it doesn't matter because you're not absorbing it. So that kind of fascinated me.
He's the one that created the Center for Neurosomatic Studies?
So he founded it, I believe, in 2012. And when I saw this video, I think it was around 2013, instantly I was interested in that work and interested in the school. I did a little bit of research about the school. It was in Florida, in Clearwater. It looked great. And I scheduled a meeting with Randy online. We had a great chat. And after that, I just decided, yeah, I'm going to enroll in this school. And I saved up money for a year. I even went to live with my parents again to save up money. Yeah, a year later, I packed all my stuff into my car and drove down to Florida and started that program. So,
wow, that's a life-changing moment right there.
Yeah, it was huge, and it was terrifying. It was scary. I was 30 years old and completely starting a new career, but I knew that I wasn't happy in my other career. I knew it was kind of a dead end, and I saw my whole life flashing before my eyes. And part of what inspired me to do that was I would look at all the people that I worked with, and they were all A, miserable, B, in pain, worse than me.
They didn't have a good quality of life.
No.
You're like, that's not for me.
Yeah, and so I saw myself in 30 years. I'm like, I can't be here in 30 years. Like, this can't be my life. I just can't do this. So when I found like this answer to my own pain and like a possible new career path, I said, yeah, I'm going to jump on that opportunity because I can't do this forever.
When did your pain actually start lessening with this? Were you learning some of that along the way?
So being at the school, the students would treat each other. We had to do homework assignments where we'd assess and treat 2 clients a week. So a lot of the students would just trade with each other and get their homework done. So I got treated by fellow students there. I actually became roommates with another student who was in his 3rd and final semester. He had already been through most of the program, so I got treated by him.
Were you able to identify what was going on? Was it your scoliosis connected to it? Or?
So with a lot of the stuff, there really isn't one root cause, but a big thing, especially as far as scoliosis is concerned, what we look for in neurosomatic therapy are leg lengthening qualities. So we're talking about structural differences in the length of the bones of the leg. So we found that my left femur was 8 millimeters shorter than the right, and we also found that I had a small hemipelvis on the left side. So your pelvis is made up of two bones, your innominate bones, the big bones on either side, and then you have your sacrum in the middle. So the bone on the left side of my pelvis was smaller than the right. So when I sit, that would cause a tilt in my pelvis.
Wow.
And that changed the angle of the sacrum or the base of the spine, and that worked its way all the way up the chain.
Do you think that was causing the scoliosis?
I think that was probably a big factor.
Interesting.
For sure. It's a big
Wow.
factor for most people. Yeah. Some chiropractors look for it. Sometimes they'll prescribe a heel lift. In neurosomatic therapy, we don't do that because that tends to cause a lot of other problems. Because if you're just lifting up the heel on one side, that will kind of change the angle of the pelvis on that side. It will create more anterior tilt, and that puts torque on the spine. And then a lot of times chiropractors will look for a difference, but then they'll do their adjustment and they'll say, well, it's fixed. But I don't think a lot of them have a way of determining whether or not there's a leg length difference, like a difference in the structure of the bone, or whether it's the soft tissue that's making it look like one leg is shorter. But with neurosomatic therapy, our measurements are kind of able to weed that stuff out and determine whether it's structural or functional.
So you are a neurosomatic and a neurokinetic therapist.
That's right.
That has a license in massage therapy. Can you kind of explain the difference between the two of those?
Neurosomatic therapy is what I studied in Florida. That's what they teach at Randy's school at the Center for Neurosomatic Studies. So you can basically break neurosomatic therapy down into two components. So there's the assessment component, and then there's the treatment techniques. What they teach you right away when you get to school is the posturology assessment. So how to look at somebody, look at all the different bony landmarks on their body. Basically what we do is we have you stand up, we'll put our fingers on different bony landmarks and just kind of get our eyes on level with the fingers and just see if one is higher than the other.
So they trained you to look at someone and assess someone with your eyes and some measuring tools, so you know when someone's out of alignment physically.
Yep. And it's all about the relative position of these bony landmarks.
Are they like different spots on the bones on the body, like the shoulder bones or the hip bones?
Yep. Yeah, different spots on the bones. And you got to use the bones because they're most reliable.
They're the most reliable indicator of a person's
of the person's posture and the way their body is organizing itself. Once we determine that, then we have a chart that we use to kind of chart everything out. So we chart the relative position of those bones when they're standing, when they're sitting, when they're lying down, and that just kind of gives us an idea as to which muscles are likely shortened and contracted, which ones are likely lengthened and strained, and that informs us as to how we need to apply the massage, because the idea is to get the shortened and contracted muscles to relax and lengthen to help bring balance to the myofascial system. And help reduce pain and improve performance. So that's the assessment. And then in addition to that, there's the techniques. And so in neurosomatic therapy, they teach you how to treat virtually every muscle in the body with massage. Even esoteric muscles like the muscles of the throat, and the soft palate in the mouth, the muscles of the jaw, even the organs, because a lot of your organs are muscles, like your intestines, your bladder, your stomach, they're all muscles.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I was thinking that from your website at Paragon Pain Solutions, all the different diseases and issues in the human body that this can help. And one of them that really fascinated me was the thyroid. We think of the thyroid conditions as being an autoimmune condition and not necessarily a physical condition, but the muscles around the thyroid can play an issue. Can you explain that?
So muscle tension can affect all of the systems of the body. So when we're talking about myofascial, where myo means muscles, fascial means all the connective tissue that kind of wraps all of your muscles and provides the scaffolding, not only for your muscles, but for your bones and your nerves and the blood vessels and the lymph. The fascia is kind of the scaffolding that supports all the systems of our entire body. So if that fascia is kind of tight and constricted and twisted in any way, then it's affecting all of those systems. So it affects the blood flow. If you have excessive tension in the muscles of the floor of the mouth and the muscles that attach to the thyroid and the thyroid cartilage, that's going to affect how the thyroid functions, because it affects the blood flow to and from the thyroid. It affects the lymph flow to and from the thyroid. It affects the nerve signaling pathways to and from the thyroid. So all of those things are affected by the tension in the muscles and the connective tissue.
Well, first off, that's fantastic, because now it isn't just a solution of adding more hormones or pills, and there can also be a physical solution to a thyroid issue.
Absolutely.
That's so exciting.
And every system of the body works that way. That's one of the things that really fascinated me about that interview with Randy, was that he just totally opened up my mind to a new paradigm as far as looking at the body and the way it functions.
And then what is the neurokinetic piece that plays in with the work you're doing? From my understanding, you're kind of a pioneer by combining the neurosomatic, which neuro means brain, somatic means
Body.
body,
Yeah.
and then neurokinetic, and you combine the two of these to do the work that you've been doing for the last 7-8 years.
I have. So neurosomatic therapy is what I learned in Florida. So that was an 18-month program. So while I was there was another student there from Texas who kind of introduced me to this neurokinetic therapy thing. Neurokinetic therapy it's a system of manual muscle testing. You might have seen traditional Chinese medicine practitioners who use it. They'll have sometimes like a case with vials with different foods and different compounds in them. They use muscle testing to kind of determine whether you have food intolerances usually.
Right.
So they'll have you hold a vial of wheat or something, and they'll hold your arm up, and they'll have they'll push on your arm.
That's the version of muscle testing I was familiar with, was
Right.
like testing for a food or a supplement.
Right.
Your muscle testing is different than that.
Yeah, so the muscle testing I do is kinesiology based, and that's been around for over a century. There's a very popular book it's really well known in like PT and corrective exercise circles. It's like the Kendall and Kendall muscle testing book. When they use muscle testing, it's really just to gauge the responsiveness of each individual muscle. So they'll use a grading system. So they'll have you push, and they'll have you resist, and they'll say that was a 1, that was weak, or that was a 5, that was really strong. But that's about individually assessing muscles. With neurokinetic therapy, it's really kind of revolutionary because it's about testing the different muscles in relation to each other, because muscles are only strong or weak in relation to one another. It's all relative.
It's all one system. It's not separating out this one muscle. They all work in a flow.
Right.
And I guess neurokinetic is helping you determine which ones to work on first.
So it's really about kind of mapping out how the brain organizes movement patterns. So movement patterns are stored in the cerebellum, in the motor control center of the cerebellum. And that really kind of tells which muscles to fire when and in what sequence. So by testing muscles in sequence with each other, we get much clearer information about how the brain is organizing these movement patterns, which muscles are strong and weak relative to one another. And then you can kind of organize those patterns within the hierarchy and say these patterns are at the top, these patterns are underneath and maybe less important. And that really works well with the neurosomatic stuff, because the neurosomatic stuff kind of gives me a clue as to where I need to start looking as far as their posture goes, where I may need to start testing. And then when I start testing, I can confirm my suspicions from the postural analysis and go, okay, well now we did the testing, so we know this muscle is overworking in relation to these other muscles. So now we go treat that overworking muscle with massage to get it to relax. And then we do some corrective exercise to help kind of wake up the underactive muscles.
I think what I really loved about your practice and your assessment is that there was always a take-home exercise that was literally a minute, maybe twice a day.
Yeah.
So it was something that fits into everybody's schedule. It's not a good 30, 45-minute practice.
Right.
Because you really were only wanting to send the signal to the brain so
Yeah.
that it learns a new thing. If you overworked it, it actually would be detrimental
Yeah.
to the programming.
If you overload a person from an emotional and spiritual level too, you're not going to get any benefit out of the exercise. That's why I like to limit it to 1 or 2 things, because I don't want to overwhelm people. And these are all new concepts to people. So if you give somebody 10 things to do, they're going to be like, whoa, that's just too much. And I don't remember what he told me, so I'm just not going to do anything. So you really have to limit it to 1 or 2 things. And that's great for the nervous system too, because it's better able to incorporate and digest these new movement patterns. And then once we kind of clear those patterns, then we can move on to something else.
When you say we're looking to correct these movement patterns, so we were talking about the dysfunctional motor patterns.
Yeah, dysfunctional motor patterns are a sequence of muscle firing that produces movement that either produces pain, chronic pain, or discomfort, or some kind of unwanted symptom, or maybe makes you susceptible to an injury.
Oh, I like to call pain the check engine warning light on the car.
Yeah.
That when it shows up and it doesn't go away in a short period of time, now there's clearly something out of balance and you need to address it. If you don't, it only is going to get worse.
So that's a great way to look at it. I mean, that's how I look at it too. Obviously, pain is multifaceted. I mean, they've come a long way as far as understanding the phenomenon of pain. The biopsychosocial model of pain is still kind of like the gold standard for understanding it. And that basically says that, pain it's a multifactorial phenomenon, and all these different factors play into the likelihood as to whether or not you'll experience a given stimulus as painful. So there's the psychological, the social, there's the biological stuff that all kind of works together to make it likely or less likely that you're going to experience pain. So I'm really just working with the biological and specifically with the kinesiology element of that. So the muscle tension patterns in the nervous system and how that might relate to dysfunctional movement patterns and how that might contribute to pain.
So let's say someone's thyroid issue started, it could happen multiple ways. Like let's say as a child, they had some emotional trauma and they were never able to speak, or they were shut down, or it could be emotional, physical trauma, could be a digestive issue that didn't allow enough nutrients to get to the thyroid. I mean, it could be any number of things that got you there, but you look at the physical side and how you can start to turn that around. So are you releasing a physical and emotional trauma in some of this work?
I've definitely had experiences where clients have burst into tears. I've had experiences where they burst out laughing. And I tell them, especially when we're working on certain muscles that tend to be very emotionally charged, I kind of warn them.
What are those muscles that are emotionally charged?
So usually the muscles around the abdomen and then the muscles of the throat are big too. But it can really happen anywhere. It can happen anywhere on the body. But I'll warn them. I'll say, okay, this is going to be kind of intense, and you might even feel a significant emotional response. Whatever you feel is okay. So as far as emotional release and like experiencing these kind of trapped emotions and trauma and all that stuff, that's not what I specialize in. That's more of like somatic experiencing. There's a lot of practitioners who do that. Peter Levine's work is great as far as that stuff goes. But I am informed about that stuff. So I do warn clients. From what I understand, it's not really so much a release when that stuff happens. The way like Peter Levine and those people describe it, it's more like a motor pattern that didn't get to complete itself because of whatever reason. You didn't feel safe enough to cry or to scream or to run away when the trauma happened. So there's still a motor pattern there that didn't get to complete itself. So the healing comes in letting that motor pattern express itself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because now you're getting all the information needed to complete the motor pattern.
Yeah. So Peter Levine talks about how animals in the wild, like a rabbit, for example, gets confronted by a predator. Maybe it will play dead, it will freeze, and maybe the predator leaves it alone. So after that traumatic experience, the rabbit will get up and it will just start shaking. And so it will just release all that trapped tension and all that movement pattern that didn't get to express itself will just kind of release, and then it will just run away and it will go about its business. But as humans, we don't really do that.
We don't
so
release.
Much. Yeah.
In fact, it's funny, you reminded me of a story a friend of mine told me about a practitioner, I think in the somatic field, who was in a car accident and was in the back of the ambulance, and the ambulance attendees are always trained, if you start to shake, they're going into shock, and they try to subdue the shake. And he informed them, he was a doctor, and he said, I'm going to shake, you need to let me out. Because he thought his connection was that if he was able to shake it out, he wouldn't have the PTSD from that experience. Like he wouldn't have stored the trauma in his body.
I remember hearing that story.
And that shaking was actually very effective. And I thought, that's why animals, maybe it's not that they have short-term memory, they just don't store the unease or the fight or flight in their body. They're able to release it quicker than humans.
Right. They don't have this, complicated system of social interaction like we have, because a lot of times it's not considered, polite, or it's just not considered right to express yourself in that way in most social situations.
Right. We store everything inside and we don't express grief.
Exactly. We need to express those things. We have to. It's all emotion, and emotion, it means motion. It literally means motion in the motor pattern that has to do with that emotion that you're feeling.
So one of the things you talk about is the gamma system. What is the gamma system?
So the gamma system is what I think we're treating when we do the neurokinetic muscle testing and when we do the treatment and the release that comes with it. With neurokinetic therapy, the goal is to identify which muscles are overactive, or what we call facilitated, and which muscles are neurologically underactive, or what we call inhibited. So I believe that that really has to do with the gamma system. So the gamma system is controlled by the muscle spindle, and the muscle spindle is a mechanoreceptor that detects stretch in the muscle. So within the muscle spindle, within this receptor, you have something called the intrafusal fiber. When it's stretched, it signals the brain to contract the muscle to counteract that stretch. So within the muscle, you have the intravusal fiber, which is part of the muscle spindle, and you have the extrafusal fibers, which are innervated by the alpha motor neurons. When you consciously contract a muscle, that's the alpha motor neuron telling your bicep to curl when you're doing a bicep curl, for example. So when the muscle contracts, the intrafusal fiber of the muscle spindle, it's slackened as a result, right? Because when the muscle contracts, it brings the two ends of the muscle together, and the intrafusal fiber is longer than that. So now there's slack in the intrafusal fiber. So in order to compensate for that, the brain tells the two polar ends of the intrafusal fiber, which have contractile properties, to contract so that it then brings tension into the intrafusal fiber. So now it can be sensitive to stretch again. So the dysfunction in that gamma system, this is part of the gamma loops, comes when those polar ends stay contracted. So now that muscle, is, no matter what, is just super sensitive to stretch. If there's even a minute amount of stretch, then the muscle will then contract again. So what I believe we're treating with neurokinetic therapy is dysfunctions in this gamma system, where the polar ends of the intrafusal fiber stay contracted so that the muscle then becomes super resistant to stretch. And I believe that's just kind of a shortcut that the brain and the cerebellum take, because this is all modulated by the cerebellum and the motor control center there. Our brains will tend to take these movement shortcuts when we do repetitive tasks over and over again, when we kind of have these same muscular patterns to either suppress emotion or to support ourselves, and we're not exposed to very varied movement, or we're not able to express ourselves the way we should. Then the brain kind of takes these shortcuts and just goes, okay, diaphragm, for example, you just stay contracted. We're just going to keep those polar ends of the intrafusal fibers contracted so that you're very resistant to stretch. So every time you stretch a little bit, we're going to tell you to contract again. And that's how we're going to get stability within the system.
Holy moly. So in a sense, your brain is actually trying to find the shortcut to help you, because things aren't going right. And what you're trying to do is then reconnect the real signals to get it to function optimally.
Exactly. Your brain does that, as a shortcut to help you, because if you're doing a repetitive task or you have these muscle patterns that you're using over and over again, it's trying to help you. But in the long term, it has consequences. It can have consequences on the movement of a joint. It can cause degeneration in the joint if the joint isn't moving properly. It can cause ischemia or hypoxia in the muscle, so a deficit of oxygen. And when that happens, the tissue can become inflamed, it can become irritated.
So if it's too compacted, then you don't get the circulation and things start to deteriorate. So how does this play out into knee replacements and hip replacements? What do you think the dysfunction is?
What's generally happening with knee and hip replacements and any kind of joint issue or degeneration, that there's excessive compression in the joint, right? So the joint will sit in the joint capsule. There's cartilage generally on both ends of the bone within the capsule, and on the end of the bone that articulates with it. So if there's excessive compression and that joint is compressed all the time, then when you move, the two bones are grinding up against each other, and the cartilage then becomes degenerated over time. And that will happen when your body's just trying to find stability, right? When you have these dysfunctional motor patterns that are leading to excessive tension in the muscles that surround the joint and create that compression. So again, what we do with neurokinetic therapy is kind of identify where these dysfunctional patterns are, which muscles are overworking and contributing to that compression.
Could they be different for each individual, or is there fairly common with, say, a knee issue?
There are definitely differences, but there are definitely patterns that I see quite often with certain issues. So with knee replacements, generally there's a muscle called the popliteus in the back of the knee that will tend to overwork, and they've done studies where they show that after a knee surgery, for example, that muscle will contract up to 300 times its normal contractile tension.
That doesn't sound good.
No, because that's creating a lot of tension there.
So even after the replacement, they haven't fixed what caused their initial problem of why they had the knee replacement in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a big one. So, and the popliteus kind of runs diagonal across the back of the knee, and it's really crucial in the locking mechanism of the knee. So when the popliteus contracts, it actually helps the knee flex and unlock, and it helps the tibia twist internally on the femur to unlock the knee. But it also attaches to the meniscus. So if that muscle is tight and contracted all the time and pulling on the meniscus, then as you flex and extend your knee, the meniscus isn't moving out of the way properly. And then now as you flex and extend the knee, you're grinding on the meniscus. That's a big one that I find with people with knee pain and especially with meniscus issues.
So someone comes to you with a knee issue. Walk me through what a client would experience at Paragon Pain Solutions.
So with most clients, first thing I do is assess the core, because everything starts at the core. If the core is dysfunctional, it's unlikely that anything else is.
And the core is the abdomen area, the diaphragm.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot. So when I talk about the core, I'm talking about the intrinsic muscles of the core. So basically the muscles that form this entire cylinder around the midsection of your body.
Okay.
Yeah, so the obliques, all the abdominal muscles in the front, the diaphragm is kind of the top of that cylinder. You have your spinal erectors and your multifidi in the back here, and then you have your pelvic floor at the bottom.
Oh wow, even the pelvic floor.
Even the pelvic floor, yeah. That's what is considered to be the intrinsic core, yeah, that whole cylinder there. So usually with that, there's some key things that I find wrong with that. That the diaphragm's a big one. That's our primary breathing muscle.
I know that popped up on me,
yeah.
And I was so surprised as an opera singer. I thought, oh, my diaphragm's so strong, but maybe it's just because I've used tension with it or I've overworked it and sent the signals. But it was really, really tight. And what I noticed, what I think was so fascinating, is that once that diaphragm released, I felt calmer.
So going back to the gamma system, right? So the gamma system in the diaphragm, in your diaphragm in that case, was dysfunctional. So that made it really resistant to stretch, right? So it had a very small range of motion. So that means that you couldn't really take full breaths in or out. You were just breathing shallowly all the time.
It's not as deep a breath as I could have taken.
Right, because in order to stabilize your core, you had to contract the diaphragm.
And that was affecting my knee.
Yeah, because that was affecting all the muscles that support your hips as well, and therefore all the muscles that support the knee. So all the major muscles that help support and decompress the knee, like the quads and the hamstrings.
It's like a downward spiral, like they're all connected.
Yeah. So I like to clear those patterns first. Now usually there are big patterns like that kind of affecting everything, and then there are more local patterns. So with you, we found the diaphragm pattern. I think we found a TFL pattern there that was also affecting the muscles of the hips. Right. And if there's a deviation in the pelvis because of an imbalance in the hip muscles, then that affects how much load that each of your knees is getting, right? So one knee then might get more of a load because of that imbalance in the hips. But then with you, I think we also found a popliteus pattern. Did we?
Yeah, we did found the popliteus, and I think you even the first time gave me some immediate relief by working on the muscle. Every time I sat down and got up, it would hurt. I couldn't do child's pose. I couldn't do squats. I thought I was getting old. It was really unsettling to have the kind of knee pain. And I was like, well, this is not the way I want to live. Right. But you were able to give me some instant relief with the combination of what you did.
And you made a lot of progress, and it was really great.
And yes. I also hadn't waited a long extended period of time. As someone has had knee pain for several years, is that the case?
The pain could be coming from the soft tissue tension, or it could be coming from the arthritis or the actual degeneration that occurred over however many years.
Because they waited so long.
Because they waited so long, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But just because they have degeneration or arthritis, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where the pain is coming from. So again, pain is multifactorial. So we don't necessarily know just because we find something that's what's causing the pain. We have to just treat it and see if you feel better.
Can someone benefit from your work that has had the knee replacement already?
So yeah, like you said, just because you replace the knee, that doesn't mean you've addressed those patterns that led to it in the first place. After a knee surgery, it's likely that these muscles, especially like the popliteus, are going to be tight and overly active as a reaction to the trauma of the surgery. Wow. So they absolutely can benefit afterwards for sure.
What are some of the more unusual cases, pain issues that people are dealing with?
I had a client about 6 months ago who came in, and she had told me that she had a traumatic brain injury, and she was having all these strange symptoms. She was like dizzy and nauseous, and she just felt kind of overwhelmed all the time. She was horseback riding, and she fell off a horse, and she told me that she landed like a lawn dart head first into the ground. So she didn't really have like the typical symptoms. Most people come in, with headaches, jaw pain, neck pain, back pain. Those are kind of the most common things that I treat. She just felt off, and she just felt totally just overwhelmed. So I just did a little bit of testing. I started with her head and neck. Couldn't find any of the usual patterns right away. So usually if there's dysfunction in the head and neck, I'll look to the muscles of the jaw. I'll look to the suboccipitals, maybe the muscles of the floor of the mouth, like the digastric. Those are kind of the more common patterns that I find. But I couldn't really find anything with her. I thought about her injury, and I thought, okay, well, she landed on the top of her head. Let's check the top of her head. And I did what's called a TL. You touch a part of the body, and then you retest and see if the test changed. And everything got strong just by touching the top of her head, which is right where she landed. So right here you have...
And you're pointing to the top of your head.
I'm pointing to the top of my head. Between your cranial bones, you have a bunch of different bones that make up your cranium. It's not one bone. It's a bunch of different bones that are all connected together, and they all shift around. But between the bones, there's connective tissue called sutures that kind of stitches the bones together, and that allows them the freedom to kind of move and shift around. So at the top of your head, you have, on either side, you have the parietal bones that kind of form the sides of your head at the top there, and they're stitched together right down the middle by the sagittal sutures. So the posterior part was facilitated. It was tight and neurologically overactive.
Because of the impact on when she hit the ground.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that pattern was still there. Her body had reacted to that impact, and that pattern was still there. It was still trying to protect
because
her.
it was still so tight and so tense up there.
Yeah. And that was restricting the movement of her cranial bones, and it was causing inhibition in all the muscles of her neck, and actually even down to the core as well. It was basically causing muscular inhibition throughout her entire body.
What was the therapy for this?
That first session, I just kind of did some light release to the cranial suture, some light tractioning of the cranial bones just to kind of just pull them apart slightly and get that tissue to relax and ease up. And then we retested, everything was strong, and she got up and she felt totally different. It was like night and day. She burst into tears right there in my office.
That makes my heart happy.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
That's also fascinating is that it didn't have to be a really painful, aggressive treatment. Like even sometimes light touch has a huge healing effect.
Yeah. Although that said, a lot of times when you do a release,
it needs to be more aggressive.
It needs to be a little aggressive. You got to find the sweet spot. There usually is some tenderness and some pain when you're treating a tight, facilitated muscle, and usually that's how you know that you're on the right spot. If it's tight and tender, usually that's the spot
indication
that you need to release.
What's the youngest client you've ever worked on?
3. Yeah.
Really?
So when I was doing my neurosomatic training, part of the training is that we have to write 2 case studies. So for my second case study in my last semester, I did my case study on a 3-year-old boy with autism. He was pretty interesting because, first of all, it was hard to get him on the table at first. It took 2 or 3 sessions just to get him comfortable being on the table and having me treat him. So before that, it was all kind of rapport building. At the time, he was pretty much nonverbal, very withdrawn, very kind of resistant to social interaction. His mother reported that he was having these episodes where he would kind of like point to his head, and she would tell me like, I think like he's having a headache or a migraine, like he's pointing to his head
and she couldn't
screaming,
help him,
and
so
she couldn't help him.
Trying to figure out what's wrong with him.
Yeah, and he would bang his head, like
to
I guess trying to relieve the pressure or whatever it was. She just wanted to get him relief just for that alone.
Right.
So by the 3rd session, I was able to kind of get him on the table and finally assess him a little bit. And right off the bat, I noticed that his atlas was rotated. So the atlas is the first vertebrae in your neck.
When you say the first vertebrae is the closest to the skull?
The closest to the skull, yeah.
Okay.
It's called the atlas because, like atlas, it holds up the skull. So the vertebrae have little points at the end called the transverse processes. And there are little holes in the transverse processes called the transverse foramen. The blood vessels that run to and from the brain run through those holes. So you have the vertebral arteries and the vertebral veins. The arteries have kind of muscular walls, so they're more resistant to compression, but the veins are very susceptible to be compressed because they don't have muscular walls. So if there's a rotation in those bones, it can kind of pinch off specifically the vertebral veins, kind of like a garden hose, right? You can just kind of pinch them off and restrict blood flow out of the brain. And a lot of times people with migraines, when they have that kind of tension build up and that pressure, that's a big contributor is
the
distortion.
Blood flow and distortion because of that atlas bone.
Yeah.
Wow. So
yeah.
you saw it was incorrect?
Yeah, and that's one of the things we're trying to do in neurosomatic therapy is kind of look for those distortions in those bones. So I saw that right away, and I just did a little mobilization. So I grabbed the ends of the bone and just kind of mobilized it back into place. And I could feel it kind of shifting back into place. And his reaction was almost instant. He just like got up, his eyes got wide, and he just kind of went over to the corner and just laid down, and he just started like really peacefully playing with his toy. And his mother just looked at him. She's like, "That's amazing. Like I've never seen him react like that before."
So he might have had a lot of tension or pain.
He did. It was a 10-week study. So within the weeks after that, she reported that he basically went from being what she considered severely autistic to just moderately autistic. And he had no more incidents like that, no more headache incidents, no more head banging. Wow. I followed up with her, I think 3 or 4 years later, and she still said he has yet to have any kind of incidents like that, no more self-injurious behavior.
That is absolutely fascinating. Yeah. Well, how do you think the bone got that way in the first place? Was he a vaginal birth or was he a C-section?
He was, and he was taken out with forceps. Yeah.
So this could have been something from the moment of birth that had been bothering him.
Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. And it delayed his learning for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. He's still moderately autistic, so it's not like I cured his autism, but it was a contributor. It was a contributing factor for sure. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Who comes to see you the most?
Back pain, neck pain, migraines, TMJ issues.
When you see a lot of neck pain, is it because of cell phones or computer use?
That's definitely a big factor. I think it's the combination of being sedentary, looking at the devices all the time in the same position, and being under stress while you're doing it. It's kind of the combination of all of those things.
It's like treating the whole person, like understanding the lifestyle.
You have to. You have to. Yep.
What do you wish something that your clients understood when they came to see you?
The idea that you have to take charge of your own health. And it's not really my responsibility or anybody's responsibility to fix you. I'm just a guide. I'm there to kind of point out these things that you need to then kind of learn about and then take home what I give you to work on yourself. Because I don't want people coming back to see me, once a week for the rest of their life, because that means that I didn't do my job. I'm just the physical equivalent of like a drug or something, just to get them a little bit of relief to get them through their day. I don't want that. I want them to be able to kind of work on these things on their own and get better and help heal themselves.
Thank you for that, Dan. I mean, I wish all practitioners understood that, because you're trying to empower their own sovereignty to really take care of themselves, that they are the master of their health, and health isn't outside of them. It starts within. And
that's right.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you for that wisdom. Has there been a guide or an influencer? I know you mentioned Randall Clark, but is there anyone else that has helped you, inspire you on this journey?
Yeah, Randy Clark, he's been huge. He taught anatomy and physiology. I do have to say, there was a point early on in my training where I thought, I don't know if this is for me. What am I doing down in Florida? Because it was just a big move. But being in Randy's anatomy and physiology class it was so fascinating, because he's such an intelligent guy and he's so engaging. The way he talks about anatomy and the way he talks about it in relation to posture and structural health just blew me away. David Weinstock, who's the founder of Neurokinetic therapy, he shifted my whole paradigm too, because he added this whole other layer to the way that I treat, and I'm forever grateful for him for that. There were a lot of people that early on in my career as a neurosomatic therapist that I felt like I didn't have the tools to treat, and once I mastered neurosomatic therapy, a lot of those people I now knew what I should have done, and then people who came in who had similar issues, I now knew what to do. So he was a big one. The Reembody method is another thing that I got into for a while, and the founder of that, his name is C.Moore. He totally shifted my paradigm as well, because one of the things he talked about was the difference between the two hemispheres of the brain, the left and right hemisphere of the brain, the dominant and non-dominant side, and the fact that each side of the body, respectively, has its own predisposed motor patterns because they're specialized for different things. So the dominant side is specialized for expelling force, the non-dominant side is specialized for absorbing force. And just that alone was totally mind-blowing to me, because again, it gave me a whole new understanding about posture and movement.
Oh, I think you're a pioneer, and I think you're leading the path. Where do you see this really working for people? And what would be like a vision that you have of the future of how to get this information to people?
I think everybody should be aware of this. I really just want people to understand the basics of how neuromotor programming works. There are too many people that are in pain and maybe physically unfit. They know instinctively, I need to move more, I need to exercise more. And what they usually do is they'll just jump right into something, whether it's powerlifting like I did, or it's, CrossFit was popular for a while, or even something like yoga. And they'll just jump right into it, and that's how I'm going to get out of pain and get fit. And then they injure themselves, or they start developing issues as a result, and they don't know why. And they're thinking, well, I'm doing these things to help myself. Why am I in pain? Why am I hurting? And it's because they haven't done the intermediate steps. And most people don't know what the intermediate steps are. So I'm hoping that I can kind of help fill in those steps and kind of tell people like, hey, before you run, you need to learn how to crawl. And then you need to learn how to walk. And then you can run. You really need to know the basics of how your body works. Like, nobody gives you a manual for how your body works. So I'm kind of hoping I can start writing that manual for people and start saying, like, this is the basics of how your body works and organizes movement. Please understand this before you start, doing these really intense things.
Can you imagine a elementary PE class where really start to educate people about the structure of movement and the importance of knowing the proper structure?
Yeah.
Before you injure or damage yourself or
Right.
disconnect those pathways.
Right. It should be taught in PE in schools, absolutely. Yeah.
And I just think about, you go into the doctor and they take your blood pressure and they weigh you. Why don't they look at your alignment? Isn't that a key component to your health?
They don't know how to. And there's kind of a big push to get away from the structural view of health as it relates to pain specifically. But it is a factor. I mean, it's definitely a factor. And just because posture alone doesn't tell you whether or not somebody will be in pain, that doesn't mean that it can't give you clues as to what physical, kinesiological things might be contributing to it.
Dr. Zach Bush's Journey of Intrinsic Health, where I'm a health coach, one of the modules is on move. And the first thing we talk about in move is we look at different pictures of bodybuilders, because the most important thing isn't muscle, but alignment.
Right.
And understanding that when one thing is off or overdeveloped or underdeveloped, that can be the key to on your wellness journey. And if you don't have it, you're never going to get to the other side of being able to really take care of yourself and move and exercise and lose weight. And
yeah, absolutely.
Well, are there any favorite books or podcasts that you recommend to people in health and wellness?
So there's a great book that I recommend to a lot of my clients, especially if I find that they're dysregulated, like they're overly stressed and their autonomic nervous system isn't well regulated, because there are all kinds of motor patterns that kind of go along with that. But it's called Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve. And there's a bunch of really great exercises in there that you can do. So if you're having migraines, if you're having neck pain, if you feel, like you have chronic anxiety and you can't sleep, that's a really good place to start.
So can't we stimulate that with just a simple hum?
Yep. That's a great way to do it. There's an exercise in the book that you can also find it on YouTube. I teach it to a lot of my clients, called the basic exercise. And you can do this lying down or you can do it sitting up too. But basically you just rest the back of your head in your hands. So interlace your fingers, rest the back of your head in your hands like this. And you just look straight ahead, keeping your head neutral. And then you just bring your gaze over to one side or the other, and you hold it there until you either sigh, swallow, or yawn. Yeah, we're going to do this together.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so a sigh, swallow, or yawn indicates that there's basically a relaxation response in the autonomic nervous system. So you're doing a couple things here. You're stimulating the tissue on the back of your neck here, and your suboccipitals are back here, and there's a very close relationship between the suboccipitals and the muscles that move the eyes. The eyes are innervated by 3 different cranial nerves. So you're stimulating the nerves of the cranium, in particular the vagus nerve, when you do this. So you look to the right, and you wait to either sigh, swallow, or yawn. And then once you do one of those things, then you just switch to the other side. Look to the left and just repeat. And you just wait until you either sigh, swallow, or yawn. And as soon as you do, that's it.
I love that. Well, you just hit on, I think, my soapbox issue with clients is, unless a client can figure out how to get into parasympathetic, which is out of fight or flight, which I assume is one of the reasons you give them this vagus nerve exercise, is that they come in and they can't actually hear you if they're in fight or flight. They're not absorbing information. They're creating more inflammation in the body. And that, how do we heal if we can't get into calm, relaxed brain waves and a healing state.
Yeah, you can't. You have to feel safe before you can heal. Absolutely. And that's really what it's about. All this stuff about the vagus nerve and vagus nerve, vagal tone and accessing the ventral vagus nerve is really about just feeling safe and having the person feel safe in that space and in their own body. So with those people, that's the kind of the first thing I work on, is just getting them to feel safe in the treatment room with me, in their own body, just feeling safe, just being there, and then we can start healing at that point. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just so wise. Dan, I know people, the best way to reach you, you're also on Facebook and Instagram.
But yeah, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. So Facebook/Paragon Pain Solutions and at Paragon Pain Solutions on Instagram.
And then you have some videos that are coming?
I post mostly on Instagram. Everything gets also posted to Facebook. I have a lot of self-treatment videos on there for some of the more common dysfunctional patterns that I find. You can always go to my website, paragonpainsolutions.com. There's a ton of info on there, and that's how you can contact me. Yeah. You can book an appointment on the website. You can book a free consultation via Zoom on the website, or you can book your first visit there on the website too. Yeah.
Well, Dan, I can't thank you enough. I think you are one of the pioneers that are changing the way health and wellness is in this country. And I can't wait to see where this goes in the next 10 years as we get such a better understanding of how the brain and how alignment plays into our overall health. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
Awesome.
Priscilla. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much today, Dan.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Harmonic Alignment. If something resonated with you, we would love to hear about it. Please consider leaving us a 5-star review and subscribing so you don't miss an upcoming episode. Thank you.
The information contained in this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider. Carefully read all labels and directions. The products and information received through the podcast should not be used to replace a consultation or advice from your healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or have any healthcare questions, please promptly call your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Dr. Larissa Sharapova and Priscilla Koblenz and the producers, are not responsible for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained in this podcast. This podcast may contain endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct financial benefit to the product or services referenced.